As a Miami Hurricane fan, I sincerely regret taking Mark Richt for granted, man. I never would have thought that Mark Richt would be the person who would give me my best moments as a Miami Hurricane fan. And before you say JT, the Mark Richt era, it's the highlight of you being a fan of Miami. Yes, people, I'm not 40, I'm not 50 years old, so I don't remember the glory days of the early 2000s and the 80s and the 90s. Like, for me to be able to relish in the glory days in Miami, I gotta watch a bunch of 30 for 30s or just go back and watch old replays on VHS tapes. 2017, 2016 were my best years rooting for the Canes, man. And it hurts to say that because Mark Richt, the way his tenure ended at Miami, I was ready for this dude to go. Like, when the news first broke that he was stepping down as the head coach for Miami and Manny Diaz was going to be replacing him, you guys don't know how happy I was.
Woo! Mark Richt just freaking retired, man. Just retired, man. Woo! Mark Richt! Mark Richt is gone, Miami fam. Mark Richt is gone.
But, looking back on it now, I kind of have to apologize to Mark Richt, man, because he did some pretty good things his first couple of years in Miami. 2016 led us to a 9-4 record, finished 20th in the polls. That's when you had Brad Kaya. For all you guys that don't remember Brad Kaya, his mama played on Friday. His mama was Felicia, so everybody should know who she is. You had Stacy Coley. You had the two-headed monster running back with Mark Walton, who had 1,000 yards, 14 touchdowns that season. Joseph Yerby. Remember Amar Richards? David Njoku, and we had the stout front seven that year. You had Chad Thomas, who some of y'all may remember. He was a really highly sought after recruit coming out of high school from the South Florida area. He's now a rapper now. He goes by the stage name Major 9. And you were starting 3 true freshman linebacker that year. You had Michael Pickney, Shaq Quarterman, who come from the 904, and then you had Zach McLeod, and they were really good. And this season was pretty tough at first. 2016 got out to a fast start. You were 4-0, beating nobodies, and then, we lost to FSU after being up 13-3 at halftime, and then after the halftime speech that, Mark Richt delivered, he didn't have those boys ready to play because the Seminoles came and they gave it to the Hurricanes. And despite the fact that Miami got outperformed in the second half, they still came close to pulling off the win. I remember when Brad Kaya led the Canes down the field. You end up getting the go-ahead touchdown with pretty much no time left on the clock. And then you go for the PAT and you think this game's about to go to overtime. But no. Of course, in typical Miami Hurricanes fashion, they have to find a way to break our hearts, and FSU ends up blocking the extra point, and they steal the win. And then after that, that's when things started to get really ugly, and that's when I thought, okay, Georgia fans were right about Mark Richt, because when Miami first hired Mark Richt, there were plenty of Georgia fans saying, man, like, you guys ain't getting anything out of Mark Richt, man. He's always going to let you down in the big games, and at a certain point, it looked like they were completely right about Mark Richt. You lose to FSU in heartbreaking fashion. You lose to North Carolina. You got crushed by Virginia Tech and then lost a close game to Notre Dame. And at that point, you're thinking Miami might not even make it to a bowl game. But then they ended up turning things around and they won their last 5 games, including beating West Virginia in the Russell Athletic Bowl. So 2016, you finished 9-4 and things were looking really promising for Miami. I was really hyped up for what Miami could be in 2017. And I made a lot of bet with Florida fans at my school going into my sophomore year that we were going to end up winning the ACC championship. And 2017, man, whew, what a time it was to be a Miami Hurricanes fan. This is easily the best year that this program has had in decades. And it doesn't matter if you're an OG Miami fan or a new age Miami fan like I was. 2017 is the best year that Miami football has had in well over 2 decades, man. And boy, it was definitely a roller coaster ride. I'll say that. You had Malik Rozier at quarterback, and he was so mid, but he was clutch as hell, though. Remember, he had that clutch comeback against Florida State. He had that late touchdown pass that he threw. Like, Miami, from the stretch of October to late November, had one of the greatest Linsanity runs that we've seen in college football in the past decade, man. Like, I remember I had a teacher named Mr. Sheffield in 10th grade, and I betted him $50 because he was an FSU fan, I was a Miami fan, and after we came back against FSU, he was like, man, you guys are going to end up losing one of y'all next 4 games. And I was like, you willing to bet some money on it? I was willing to put $50 on the line that Miami was going to end up running the table the month of November. And he was like, I'm a teacher, so I can't bet money with you, but if y'all end up winning your next couple of games, including beating Virginia Tech and Notre Dame, then I'll give you some extra credit points on your grade. And I took him up on his offer, and boy, he ended up having to give me like 15 points worth of extra credit because Miami was going crazy that year. And it wasn't always pretty. You already know how they barely survived Georgia Tech and North Carolina. But then, something just clicked. The last 2 games of that year that really spelled special for Miami. Because, you go into that Virginia Tech game and you're like, okay, this thing is probably going to be a close game, but you still felt pretty good about Miami's chance to win it. Well, they smacked Virginia Tech pretty soundly, but then they baptized the Catholics. Remember that Notre Dame-Miami game? That year, everybody was hyping up. They were saying convicts versus the Catholics. Well, the Catholics got baptized in the name of the convicts. And this game at Hard Rock is the loudest game that I can ever remember hearing as a Miami Hurricane fan. I didn't go to this game in person, so I can only imagine how loud it was if you were actually there. But from the TV screen, you couldn't even hear the damn announcers, man. Like, the Hard Rock was rocking, and that's when you had the turnover chain. Like, y'all forget about the turnover chain, man. Don't not like the Miami Hurricanes ain't have college football in the chokehold at that time, man. Everybody was going crazy over the turnover chain. And then after we came up with the turnover chain, a few years after that, everybody came up with their own version of the turnover chain. Either they had something called the turnover pads, or they just had some different iteration of the turnover chain. But, Miami really had college football in a chokehold, man. When they smacked Notre Dame, I thought that this really was going to be the year, man. I had my teachers saying, oh, man, like, y'all boys might actually pull it off. You had my homeboys who are Florida fans who were a little bit envious. They were like, damn, like, Miami actually might have a squad this year, JT. And, just when everything is going great for Miami football, like always, they always find a way to screw it up, man. And then it all came crashing down after they beat Virginia. They got upset by Pitt the week before the ACC championship. And what was so devastating about losing to Pitt is that Miami was ranked at the time 2nd in the college football playoff rankings. Now, everybody knew that Miami most likely was not going to be able to beat Clemson. But if they were able to remain undefeated and they lost to Clemson, and they were a one-loss team, they still had a high chance of getting into the playoffs that year. So once Miami lost to Pitt, you kind of already knew that their chances of making it to the playoffs were pretty dim. But you had hope because this team showed a lot of promise. You beat Virginia Tech, you smashed Notre Dame. So you would have thought that Miami would at least have a little bit of a shot to beat Clemson. But, man, Clemson back then, they were a machine, boy, because they absolutely ripped the soul out of my heart as a Miami Hurricane fan. I didn't even finish watching the game. Like, I was just so disgusted with what I saw out of Miami in that ACC championship against Clemson. It's like, them boys didn't even look like they deserve to be on the same field as Clemson, man. And I was like, bro, are you kidding me? We're like a 10-1 team. You mean to tell me we're getting dog-dragged by Clemson? And the thing that has always irritated me about Miami is that it's not like we've never had good enough talent to be able to beat a team like Clemson. Because at the time, we were still recruiting at a pretty high level. Like, we've always recruited at a pretty decent level, even when we had Al Golden as the head coach. So I was very frustrated to see Miami just get dragged through the mud and put through the ringer by the Clemson Tigers, boy. And then after that, I didn't really care too much about the bowl game. It's like we lost to Wisconsin in the Orange Bowl, and we ended up looking like a very promising season. Ended up resulting in a disaster, because that was a foreshadowing of what was to come for next year in 2018. And 2018 was really the year that broke me as a Hurricane fan. I'm going to just keep it 100. I really don't want to talk about it that much. I remember losing week 1 early to Joe Burrow and LSU. And this wasn't 2019 Joe Burrow and LSU. Like, this was Joe Burrow when he was a nobody and he was trying to make a name for himself. This was when Joe Burrow was mid. And the only noteworthy wins that Miami had that year was when N'Kosi Perry led us from behind against FSU. And you guys want to know something crazy? I just recently graduated from FAU not too long ago. And when I first got to FAU, guess who was one of the first people I met? N'Kosi Perry. And he's one of my favorite Hurricane players of all time. I met him when he was taking visits when he entered the transfer portal, and he was at FAU spring game. And I went up to him. I was like, hey, dude, like, you know N'Kosi Perry? And he was like, yeah, what's up? I was like, bro, like, I'm a big fan of you, because I used to defend N'Kosi Perry relentlessly back when I was a young, and I was like 14, 15 years old going to war for this dude in his Instagram comment section. And I showed him the comments of me, you know, defending him, and he was like, oh shit. And the dude who he was taking the visit with was like, bro, that's love. And I was like, yeah. And I asked him about that FSU comeback, man, and he said that moment is one of the best moments of his whole entire life, because, you know, he didn't want to lose to FSU. You know, one thing about Miami is no matter how bad the season goes, it always is a lot worse when you end up losing to Florida State. So being able to lead Miami to that comeback win was a really big moment for him. And it was a really big moment for Miami at that point during the season. And then they ended up upsetting Pittsburgh Lake. But outside of that, there was nothing to be positive about from this season, man. You had Mark Richt calling the same plays. It was run, pass on third down. And then when he decided to throw the ball, like, it wasn't like he was attempting to take shots downfield. It was either him calling short passing plays or some freaking bubble screens. And then he didn't want to fire his son, John Richt, who was the quarterback's coach, because a lot of people wanted John Richt gone because he was playing musical chairs at the QB position between N'Kosi and Malik Rozier. And a lot of us were like, bro, like, just pick a quarterback and stick with him, which the right decision would have been to remain with N'Kosi Perry. And it made no sense to keep pulling N'Kosi Perry, because he's a young, inexperienced quarterback. And you ruin his development by pulling him for a guy like Malik Rozier, which you already knew what he was, mid. So for you to keep going back and forth, none of the quarterbacks were ever able to get into a rhythm, and it hurt the offense. So I was so happy when he stepped down and resigned after the season, and we promoted Manny Diaz, which I guess we didn't really promote Manny Diaz because he ended up accepting the job offer at Temple, but then we ended up stealing him back because everybody wanted Manny Diaz. And the Manny Diaz era, that's just a story for another day. But, you know, looking back on the Mark Richt era at Miami a few years later, you know, I think about the Manny Diaz era. I'm thinking about how the Mario Cristobal era has gone right now. Like, that Georgia Tech game just blew me, bro. Like, kneel the damn ball. Are you kidding me? It's just, Mark Richt, I sincerely apologize to you, man. I really regret taking the Mark Richt era of Miami football for granted. Now, I feel like things are looking up for the Canes in 2024. I'm expecting Miami to win an ACC championship this year, but I just think back on the Mark Richt era, like, damn, bro, like, we really had college football in a chokehold at one point, and people would never admit it because Miami kind of seemed as the same realm as Nebraska, like they just been a dead program for years, and they're living off the glory days of tradition and whatnot. But 2017 is a season that I will never forget as a Miami fan. And I don't even think about the 3-game losing streak. Like, I more so think about the highs of that year. Like, that Notre Dame game was so epic. Like, the Hard Rock Stadium was rocking, bro. Like, it was just a different aura around Miami football in 2017, bro. Like, I've never been so happy being a Miami fan during that time, that crazy insanity run we had during that span, like smacking Virginia Tech, smacking the Catholics. Like, that was a great time to be a Hurricanes fan. And it's always great to be a Hurricanes fan. You feel me? Despite the fact that this program has been down for so many years and I became a fan during the Al Golden eras, like, people always ask me, like, JT, why did you decide to be a Hurricanes fan, bro? Like, I don't have no regrets about being a Hurricanes fan. Like, I started out as a Hurricanes channel. I got a lot of love from Miami fans. You guys still show me a lot of love to this day. So I'm a Miami Hurricanes fan to the day I die. I don't care how much emotional distress this team puts me through. I'm going to always root for my team, my squad through and through. You know, I'm not a bandwagoner. Hell, I'm a Steelers fan. We going through some hard times. I'm a Chicago Bulls fan. We've been going through hard times ever since Derrick Rose kneecaps got blown out. So it's like, I'm a fan through and through when it comes to Miami football, bro. But I really regret taking the Mark Richt era of Miami football for granted, because if you would have told me that he would have given me my best moments as a Hurricane fan years later, like, I would have told you, bro, don't talk to me. Because I was so disgusted with Mark Richt as a head coach, bro, with the play calling, the way he was managing the quarterback situation, to us losing the teams we had no business losing to. Like, his final season, dog, we lost to Boston College, Virginia, Duke. These are schools that you should never, ever lose to if you're Miami. Like, Duke is a basketball school, man. Same thing in Virginia. Like, that was so embarrassing having to go to school after those losses, bro. But then Manny Diaz came and yeah, bro, I regret taking Mark Richt for granted. Wishing him the best.